Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Samantha St. Joe, and I'm the current president of the Black City Union here at Brooklyn College. Thank you all for being here to meet and each of one of you in person or on Zoom. Okay. I'm delighted to be able to host the conference meeting and discussion to commemorate and bring awareness to the unseen and untold stories about slavery. Before we start, let's have a moment of silence for those who are unable to join us and who have lost their lives during the pandemic. Thank you. Now, I'm very excited to get into this event, so I will now pass it to the esteemed Professor Lawrence Johnson.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see faces in person. So many I know through Zoom, and I'm trying to acclimate to seeing who you are in real life. But, I think of tonight's program as a coming together, which, in my opinion, is in the best spirit of African diaspora traditions. Thing for unions, potlucks, carnivals, homegoing, memorials, healing, partying, all types of celebrations of life. Tonight is no different. Tonight is a coming together. This is the first time that Black faculty and staff has had an event on campus in over 2 years. And we're slowly making our way back. Tonight's turnout is, a great example of, the coming together. But tonight's program is not just about Black faculty and staff, but to celebrate the achievement of one of our proudest members, Robert Jones Jr. But this night isn't just about Robert Jones Jr. alone. We also are here to raise awareness about the legacy of slavery in Brooklyn as well, and the continued struggle to make public space for our ancestors, which can help us chart a future course for all of us. For that, we also have come together with the Flatbush African Burial Coalition, in which we have Alison Martinez, and Samantha Bernadine. During our Black History Month, we began the reading group where faculty, staff, and students came together from all over the campus on Zoom. Many of us are here tonight. Some of you all are still on Zoom. We also had an event with the Flatbush African Burial Ground Coalition also in February. Now we're together. In organizing this event, BFS came together with the Black Student Union, who without them, this event would not be possible. The same could be said about the Wolf Institute and the support they have given for not just this book club, but past book clubs. And we also have many co-sponsors who will name now: the Center for Teaching and Learning, the Black and Latino Male Initiative, Africana Studies, Puerto Rican and Latino Studies, the English Department, Sociology, History, Women and Gender Studies, the LGBTQ Resource Center, Student Activities Involvement and Leadership, and the Asian American Faculty and Staff Association. We thank everybody for all the support. And ultimately, this event is the coming together of all the support that we've leaned on each other for the last 2+ years. And ultimately, this is how we keep going forward. So with that said, we have a program that's full tonight. We have many people. And up next to the microphone, we have the poet and writer, Monique Ngozi Marie, who will help us with a poem. Welcome, Monique.
How you doing? So y'all to see all your faces. I have the honor, I suppose, of being a member of staff, a member of faculty, and a recent alum in MFA poetry. And in my capacity as a writer, I interviewed Robert on Monday, the 25th of April. And we spoke about, amongst other things, the ancestors. So this poem is dedicated to my recent ancestor, my mom, Celeste Jordan. I'm still here in 2021. Mom on the porch with me. Bougainvillea and palm trees shimmering to the padlock landscape, lest you bend too far and fall in the garden. A fleeting moment in a year of wait and see. Who you are is glistening. All comes from some mysterious hand of God glistening, whom I have yet to believe in me. There is no counting for the mercy. So you see, this woman whose voice talks of the shadow tree. There is joy and recognition, yet fear and loathing at the gate. Some long to me since I could share my grief and gratitude for your garden. It is the rejection that hurts, being turned away from the gate, but then to the skin of your dignity glistening, the childlike playing in the simple garden. Somewhere inside there, the youth is me. I look into those gray eyes and think of tangled trees. The fierceness that is dead there, I truly see. Without the love and recognition, who can see? And then confusion. You lose your steady gait. One moment, blue skies marked by flowering sandbox streams. The next, cloudy, murky, dark, even, no bliss. One moment, giddy with laughter here with me. The next, sad and full of sorrow. Plumbagos dying in the garden. I am not here to see grows old as bearded fig trees, as you saw me grow through all my times in your garden. It should not be that we stand beside these oceans in different nations, so very hard to see. But so it is now. We cross the gate. So it is. You slowly leave me. Listening to you this fall from silver birch trees, me waiting in the luscious garden. See how we come together at the party.
Thank you, Monique. I just want to make a quick announcement for all of you who, like myself, read too often from my iPad. There are actual physical copies of the prophets in the back of the room, which you can help yourself to. And if Robert is gracious, you can even sign the copy. So just make sure you sign for the copy of the book so the Book Institute can have a record. With that being said, I will now introduce former Black Faculty and Staff President Crystal Schloss.
Good evening, everyone. It's so good to see all of you in person. So I'm going to introduce Robert. Robert Jones Jr. was born and raised in New York City. He's what you would call a Brooklyn College twofer. He has both a BFA in creative writing with honors and an MFA in fiction from Brooklyn College. Robert Jones Jr. is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Prophets, which was a finalist for the 2021 National Book Award for Fiction, winner of the 2022 Edmund White Award for Debut Fiction, and named one of the best books of 2021 by the Washington Post, the Times Magazine, Entertainment Weekly, and USA Today, among others. His writings have been featured in the New York Times, Essence, and the Paris Review, as well as the critically acclaimed anthologies 400 Souls and the 1619 Project. Robert Jones Jr.
Good evening, everyone. It feels so strange to be back. I, as Crystal said, I was an undergraduate student here, a graduate student here, and then I worked here for 10 years in the Office of Communications and Marketing. So I've been on campus for 16 years straight. And when I resigned in 2019 to pursue my writing, I never looked back. So I'm back on campus now, and things look so different and so strange. Before I get started, I want to make a land acknowledgement to the Knaupsy and Lenape peoples upon whose land we live and reside. I would also like to acknowledge the ancestors for whom suffered and survived so that I might be here. For people who might not know what the Prophets is about, it is the story of Samuel and Isaiah, two young enslaved men on a plantation in Mississippi during antebellum slavery, and they fall in love. And the book revolves around how that love transforms, angers, inspires, is an impetus for a revolt on this plantation at this time. But the book also gives Samuel and Isaiah's love a lineage that extends back to the before time in Africa when queerness was not considered an oddity or something that was depraved or sinful or disgusting or separate from nature, when it was considered whether you were gay, lesbian, queer, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, all of that was considered part of the natural landscape. And so I want to read a short part from the Prophets that speaks to that before time. It's a chapter called Song of Songs. And in this chapter, the precursor for Samuel and Isaiah, Lewa and Kosa, had been captured in Africa and now on a slave ship headed to the United States. And this is kind of how Husai rebels against being dehumanized and diminished. Song of Songs. The sun was burning hot when they were walked to the ship's deck. A strange rotation around the ship, and some of its crew spat, laughed, and downed libations. They seemed unaware of their own filth as they pinched their noses and frowned. Some of them held onto guns, others had knives. Kosai looked into their faces. He wanted to understand what they were, see if he could retrieve something from them that could explain all of this. He saw hips with hands reaching out of them. He saw little skinless girls lined up to sing. He saw boys running into sea foam, and when they turned to wave goodbye to their families standing on the shore, they had everything except faces. Suffocation was their birthright. The chains rattled at Kosai, and the two others he was linked to shuffled around the deck to the jeers of all. Then he saw him nearby in partially hidden by the glint of the sunlight and the mask of shadow, but recognizable by the tone of his grievances. It was Elewa. In the pit of his stomach, Kosai felt spikes jut out from a spear. There was a vibration then which summoned forth the tremors of his entire body, bringing up everything and taking him down to his knees. One of the skinless said something to Kosai in their jackal language, in which everything landed like an insult. But there was another voice coming from the corner of the ship where the sun couldn't all the way reach. It sounded so near, the voice, and yet he couldn't pinpoint its direction. It didn't matter. He recognized its clicks and timbre, its highs and lows, and on them he could climb, reach the frightening heights, generally hidden in the mists and shrouded in treetops. A hand. All he needed was a hand, a signal of some kind, a call, permission. In the silence, 7 women linked by the crooks of their elbows, heads newly shaven and breasts firm. The one in the middle, ululated. It had begun. Excuse me. Then Elewa moved closer through the crowd, and Kosai saw that it wasn't Elewa risen after all. It was a boy. He was pale, but not hard, looked younger than Kosai even, perhaps had just reached puberty himself, walking in footsteps twice as large as his own feet. Admirable. Dirty, but it was clear that he was a boy, denied the playfulness that all boys enjoyed, to give chase and smile mischievous but harmless things into existence, to pick fruit from trees and stain their hands with juices, stick a toe in a river and get pushed in by a friend, but only outside of the presence of the hippos that moved the water, watching peacocks bow and preen and walk in circles to impress their betrothed. Someone had denied this boy all of that, had interrupted his flow, damned it, and replaced it with thorn and dry leaf. And it was apparent in the moisture of his eyes, which he had wiped away before it had the chance to be a sign of life. Kosai held onto the boy's budding sympathy with both hands, marveled at its shape, rubbed its smooth edges, and let its sweetness dance on his tongue. It was alive, curled into its own warmth, and only unfurled slowly, like a fist opening up to peace. This was kind, but too late. Kosai had already spotted the pulse of life throbbing in the boy's neck. And this, too, had its calling. Loud and rambunctious, wide open and seductive, it asked for him, and he obliged. He shot up and roped his chains around the skinless boy's neck, then snatched his wrists apart. The boy kicked and struggled and thrashed. Kosai didn't let go. The others began to charge him, but Kosai had already managed to pull himself back up against the half wall of the deck. He took a deep breath and shouted, "This triumph is for Elewa in the name of King Akusa." Then he fell back over the wall of the ship, the boy in his grasp. With them, the 2 other people chained to Kosai crashed down into the waves, shocked, then comforted by the cold embrace of the water, soothed by the sea foam, and then absorbed. Kosai wouldn't swim. He held onto the skinless boy until his body was still. Then he let out his own breath, and together they began to sink. Such a shame. But he had to do it. He had to press into this corner. There was no way he was going to die alone. It had already been determined. They shall die together. For this was glory. Elewa. As they descended, Kosai prayed for forgiveness from the woman and the man who were chained to him. He didn't ask them if they had wanted to drown, but took it upon himself to drag them into the deep, way down, lower now than the bottom of the beast they had dropped from. Maybe that was the sin his father left out of the story, the part about how, in order to survive the mountain people, they had to come down a mountain of their own, had to wear the remains of some other people's children around their own necks. Victors gave themselves the right to rename murder, triumph, and adorn themselves with jewelry made from the bones of the vanquished. So this is what it looks like, Kosai said to himself as the shifting warrior light began to fade. The view from the mountain top, it was then as the blackness took everything. Good. Thank you.
Wow. All right, we're gonna now use this moment as an opportunity to engage. We've had questions also that's about different parts of the book, big picture ideas about the book. So how should we do this? Maybe I'll start off with a question after the silence. This is what I like to teach. But yeah, we'll start off with questions. I guess if you have a question, maybe you could come towards the front, take a seat, and that could be like a cue. Then you ask a question, Robert comes up and answers. Then we'll do that for about, 15, 20 minutes or so. But as long as the questions are good, then we'll sit. Then we'll make room for our panel segment of the evening. So the question that I want to ask is actually a question that I was thought about, once it was raised in the discussion, actually twice. And I'm sorry, Mike, I think this might be your question. But you said, or maybe Joseph, you all asked the question, what is the question that Robert is asking, right? And what is that question? And do you believe that Robert answered it? So I guess we'll start with that.
That sounds like a Joseph Benton question. I did have a question. The book actually started with the question. I came up with the idea to write the prophets when I was a senior in undergrad here at Brooklyn College. I had just got accepted into the MFA program. And if Ellen Tremper is telling the truth, she said I'm the first undergraduate student to be accepted into that MFA program. And I was nervous because I did not have a project ready to work on for that. But I did know that I wanted to write a novel. And there had been this idea that was floating around in my head for several years that I never articulated and I never let myself really examine. And the question started to kind of prick at me when I was a minor in Africana studies. I was reading all of these fabulous works by people like Zora Neale Hurston, and Wallace Thurman, and James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Gloria Naylor, the list goes on. And what I realized was I was always looking for the Black queer presence where it rested in these works. And I noticed that prior to the Harlem Renaissance, there's very little discussion, if any, of Black queer people. And I wanted to know why. So the earliest reference I could find was in Wallace Thurman's The Black and the Berry, which was written in 1929. And I said, well, Black queer people didn't like slavery and other remarkable events prior to this. And so I started to do some research. And the only references at the time, this was about 2006, that I could find were in Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. She describes how her master, or another master, I can't remember, chained a male enslaved person to his bed and used him sexually. And then in Toni Morrison's Beloved, there's a scene where the character Paul D is sexually assaulted by a male overseer. So I thought, okay, so here was the real question. What about love? And so, because Toni Morrison herself said, if you cannot find the book you wish to read, you must write it. I was terrified to do it because I knew that in order to write it, I would have to attack several myths. One of those myths being that Black people didn't become queer or transgender as a result of slavery, which is a very popular idea, that the trauma of slavery made us perverted. And I knew that I would also have to critically examine Christianity for its role in the subjugation of LGBTQIA plus people. And I knew that would anger large swaths of the population. So I was afraid to write it. The other reason why I was afraid to write it is because when I was talking to some sociologists, they suggested that there could not have been Black queer people because that identity didn't exist until modern times. So I had to think about myself as a Black queer person and say, when did I know my queerness, even if I didn't have the language for it? I was 3 years old and I had a crush on Michael from Good Times. So that's how I knew. Nobody told me that was possible. Nobody gave me a word to express what that meant, but I knew it. And so I followed that intrinsic knowing that if I knew without context that I was queer, for lack of a better term, then why couldn't my ancestors know that too? Why did we need an identity label to know who we are? And so I moved from that position. And what I discovered as I did further research was, particularly when I listened to the oral traditions of continental Africans, in particular, Esther Arnold, who is from Ghana. She said, if you had asked my great-grandparents, what is a homosexual? They would have said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And as a Westerner, you would have walked away from that conversation thinking, okay, there are no homosexuals in Ghana because they don't even know what it is. But if you had described what you meant by homosexual, they would have said, oh, you mean sex. Oh, you mean love. Because they didn't see the need to separate heterosexual, homosexual, cisgender, transgender. They just felt it was like just nature, part of the community. And it wasn't until the invasion of Christian and Islamic missionaries and colonizers that they sort of imported these ideas that homosexuality was sinful, transgenderism was sinful, and so on and so forth. And then, as a result of the trauma of slavery, African Americans, Caribbeans, and other people in the diaspora internalized those ideas such that we thought that they were our ideas. So you hear things like being homosexual is un-African, and there's nothing further from the truth. Being homosexual is as African as you can be. It's actually homophobia is like un-African. So I wanted to tackle all of these things when writing this book, and it took me 14 years to write because it was just hard, and I wanted it to be as good as Toni Morrison's work. She has a tremendous influence on me. I think she is the best writer who ever lived. And so it was 14 years of revision, trying to get it as good as I could possibly get it. And to be honest with you, when I read it now, all I see are the flaws. And I wish I had another 14 years to like work on it. But my editor was like, it's fine to go out to the road, you have to let it go. And so that was the long response to that question about the question.
Well, you kind of answered both questions. The first one was, what inspired you to make the characters queer? But you answered that, and then the second one was, were you hesitant to but you also answered that, so.
Incredibly hesitant. And you know, it's surprising to me how I have not experienced much animosity or pushback because of the subject matter. It's if I have experienced it, it has kind of been sort of surreptitious, sort of passive aggressive, but not really super aggressive. And that is what I found the most surprising, because I was expecting to be on banned book lists and all that kind of stuff. And there's still time. But I was telling my editor Sally Kim, Korean American woman, was just incredible at Clinton. And she talked to me about how when she bought The Prophets, how so many other editors were like, gosh, even in its raw form, it's so well written. That ending, it's, what do white people think? So it was very much like I got to understand behind the scenes how work is shaped for the white gaze. And one of the things I wanted to make sure that I did not do when I wrote this book was submit to the white gaze. So what you'll know about The Prophets is that there's no white savior. White people are not centered. I do have white characters and they do get a piece of the narrative, but they're not at the center of it, because I find it sort of pathological to have to cater to a particular point of view in order for that person to understand, for those people to understand. And I ask them to rise to their own humanity and have empathy in a way that doesn't have to satiate their narcissism. So, yeah.
Thank you.
More questions?
Okay, I will give something to make sure I got it right. So as a reader, I found some parts in your book hard to read. It was raw but necessary. What was the hardest scene for you to write? Yes, I know 14 years is a lot. So maybe one question. Go ahead. Sorry.
That is a good question. The hardest scene for me to write.
You can choose two if you want.
Any scenes involving rape were difficult to write. As a survivor, it's hard to write about something like that where I always call rape the living murder, the murder you survived. That's what it feels like somebody killed you, but you didn't die. And so when you're writing about rape, you have to be really careful not to glamorize it. And you have to be sure that you're putting it in the hands of the person responsible, not the victim. And so in the book, Maggie is a character who experiences a brutal rape, but it's nowhere in her sections. She omits it, but then you find out later in the book who the rapist is, and he describes the scene, because I wanted him to be the one to say, this is what I did, as opposed to Maggie having to carry the burden of his actions. So those scenes were really difficult to write. And the other thing that was really difficult to write was the perspective of Paul, the plantation owner, because I could not wrap my head around what was required that you lose so that you can treat another human being like an object or a tool. I don't have that in me. And so I had to really think hard and sit with Paul for a really long time until he spoke to me about where that comes from and why he felt that this was an okay morale, that it was moral to do this. So the rape scenes and sort of articulating from the perspective of Paul were the two most difficult things that I had to do. In fact, writing the whole section took me the longest out of every other part of that book. It took me a really long time. And I think that's probably why Paul's chapter is so long, because it's me writing to kind of try to figure out the psychology of that character. Thank you. Yes.
I'm curious, what you said in the previous answer, you said that various editors were saying, but what are white people going to think of the ending? Could you say more about that?
Sure. Here's what I've observed about publishing. If you are a Black author, there are certain things that you are required to do in order to be celebrated in particular ways and or to be given access. You have to sort of give white people an in, and usually that in is a character that they can latch onto and feel emboldened or comforted by. Usually like a white savior or something like that, or a mammy who loves the white children, something to that effect. Or you have to write in ways in which you're pathologizing Black people so that stereotypes are familiar and even liberal whites can feel, I recognize this, I can buy into this story. So often those types of stories are reported and focused on, and I made like a conscious decision that like, I'm not going to make Black people angels in this book, but I'm not going to make them demons. I'm going to make them human, fully dimensional, and I want them to be rounded and real. And I'm not going to diminish them. And I'm also not going to put in a white savior because that undermines the project. So I have a character, Timothy, in the book, who you think is going to be like a white savior character, and then he sort of undermines that whole thing, and that's intentional. And that was sort of what my editor was hearing from, because the profits went to something called auction, meaning that several publishers wanted to publish it. And I was new to that process, and auction felt really strange to me too. Given the subject matter, my ancestors, but it reveals quite a few things to me, because the highest bidder, this is so ironic, the highest bidder said to me, we have to sort of do a white savior in this book if you want to win a Pulitzer or a National Book Award, all of the big prizes, you're going to have to do that. So I said to my agent, my literary agent, we're not going to highest bidder. And when I say highest bidder, I'm talking about they bid $1.1 billion. And I said, that's more money than I've ever seen in my lifetime. I could have bought a house, but I could not sell my soul, especially with this being, about my ancestors. I could not do it. So my agent was like, "You sure?" And I was like, "I am 100% sure." My husband was like, "You sure?" I was like, "Yes, I am 100% sure." And so we went with a lower bid, but I felt confident because when I had the meeting with the publishing company that I went with, Sally Kim and I sat down and she got it. Like, she understood it. She's like, "I'm not going to change your vision. I'm not going to change your voice. I just want you to sharpen whatever tools you bring to the table." And that's how we worked together. She would ask questions about things. Why is this character important? Why does this chapter come after this one? Things that made me think about the book in different ways so that we could get the structure in a way that seemed better than the structure that it was in. But she never once asked me to compromise my vision. That is kind of what I wanted. And I didn't get nominated for a Pulitzer. I was a finalist for the National Book Award. But I realized those are not the things that are important. What's important is I got an email from a young queer man in Kenya who told me that the book is on the Black market in Kenya and he read it, it changed his life, it emboldened him. It was safer knowing that people like me are in the world, that stories like this are in the world. That's the purpose.
Sorry, that was a wonderful answer, but was there something specific to the ending?
Oh, yes.
Right, because when you
Sorry.
said it first, you said, oh, what about that ending?
Because the ending is a slave uprising. So
Okay.
the slaves are killing the family that lives on the plantation, and the other editors felt that might scare white people and
Right.
sort of send the wrong message to Black people, like, you know, the natives are restless kind of thing. I think about there was this show, I think it was Stars and Showtime called American Gods. I don't know if anyone ever watched it. And there was a character on there, the trickster. It was Anansi, and he was played by Orlando Jones. And Orlando Jones was removed from the show because the producer said, "You are saying things in the show that I don't think Black people need to hear." It was, Anansi had a real rebellious spirit, telling Black people to revolt and all of that. And that is, I didn't realize how commonplace that feeling was. And it made me start thinking about, well, what are white people actually afraid of? Are they afraid that if we are liberated, that means that they are going to be subjugated, that we're going to get revenge? It just made me start thinking about things like that. But it was that particular aspect of the ending that the editors found.
No, I think of that as the pre-ending. To me, the ending is then in the forest, but yeah.
I actually think of the ending as the acknowledgements, which were only supposed to be 2 pages, but they're 10 pages, because I said, if I never get to write another book again, if this book flops and nobody wants to get a deal, I want to thank every single person that has ever meant anything to me, that has ever encouraged. Many of them here at Brooklyn College. And so I went on for 10 pages, which my husband said it's almost like a chant or a prayer, where you just these thank yous over and over and over, particularly to ancestors and such. So I really consider that the book.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Hi. So you mentioned the ancestors a lot, and you provide kind of like throughout the story their perspectives and their voices. So why did you feel that you needed to include the voice of the ancestors throughout the story?
That's a good question too. So the decision to include the ancestors comes from a dream. While I was in the process of writing this, I keep a notepad by my bed because inspiration strikes again. Always when you're ready to go to sleep, when you're tired, that's when you start hearing words and voices and things you want to write down. So I had a dream where I was in a field, like a fenced-in garden or something, and I was on my knees in the dirt, digging because I was trying to till the soil to get it ready for planting, and I wasn't doing it properly. And standing behind me was really, really old man, very dark skin, gray hair. And he put his hands on his hips and he looked at me and he said, "You do not yet know this." So I woke up from the dream, I scribbled it down, back to bed, didn't think anything of it. Woke up the next morning to work on the manuscript and saw that I had written that down. It's like, "You do not yet know this." that doesn't sound like any other voice in the book. It's a direct address, it sounds like to me. And the dream, this dream is this sort of like the ancestors saying they want a voice in this so that they can guide me through it when it gets tough, so they can guide the reader through it so that the reader knows kind of where they're going, where they're situated. So I said, put the voices in. I'm gonna let the ancestors talk through me. And in each of those sections where the ancestors were speaking, I would say I was almost in a trance when writing those things. There was a rhythm. I was hearing a beat, because I usually write at like 3 a.m. That's like the magic hour, the witching hour, the world is quiet. And you literally you hear things in the silence. I don't know if anybody else, when it's really quiet, you're hearing something. And so I tried to tune into those things to get inspiration. So I just, whatever came in through the ether, I let flow through me. I wrote those sections and let the ancestors have their say.
Thank you.
So you talked about Toni Morrison as an influence, and I just wanted you to maybe say a little bit about James Baldwin and his relationship to your auntie.
Like James Baldwin, and I came relatively late to James Baldwin. I heard the name when I was growing up, but I knew nothing about James Baldwin. Until my first semester at Brooklyn College as a freshman. Do they still have
English 101.
or three?
Or three.
No,
English 101.
people power politics. Was that what three?
They still have that.
Okay.
Political science.
Oh, it's political science. Well, we had this course called People, Power, and Politics.
Oh.
It was a 4-credit course. And what was my professor? Jeremy, I can't remember his last name. He retired a while ago. And we were reading from the book, People, Power, and Politics book, and we got to this essay called Fear the Dragons by James Baldwin. And I was electrified by the level of craft, by the voice, by the assurance, by the authority, by the subject matter. You know, in this essay, he's predicting the downfall of Michael Jackson, and this is like 1986, 87. And so he goes on to talk about gender and the problems with masculinity in the society and all of these things. And I was just like, okay, who is this man? You know, how do I find out more about it? So I read everything by him voraciously, found out that he was a Black queer man, that he was born and raised in New York City, that he is a spectacular writer, all of the things I saw myself as. So I kind of like adopted him as a spiritual godfather to help me sort of think of myself as a writer, because I never really thought of myself as a writer, even when I was writing all the time. You know, I come from a blue collar family where something like writing is maybe a hobby, but it's not something you do full time. You work for the city, you get a good job, pension and benefits, and you retire. You know, from that, you don't become an artist. And it's such a shame because my family is full of artists that were never realized their full potential as artists because of that mentality. My mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, my aunts, my uncle, all very talented artists. So Baldwin provided for me a pathway to think of myself in that way and to continue to work toward that, even as I doubted myself, even as I heard the voices in my head saying that I did a good job because, you know, writing on your bills, that sort of thing. I still dedicated a lot of my time to writing. And also, I take a lot of my moral cues from Baldwin because he had an immaculate morality. And he was not afraid to tell the truth, even in the face of, you know, he had a lot of critics. Among them were people like Ralph Ellison and Richard Wright. some of the Black Panthers despised James Baldwin, mainly because of his homosexuality. But he continued through that. He loved them through that. He wrote to them through that. And he was just a remarkable being. And one of my regrets in this life is that I never got the chance to tell him. But I'm hoping that the prophets acts as sort of a thank you to him.
All right. Thank you for that. I'm actually going to call up another past Black Faculty Staff President, David Wells, Director of the Black Latino Male Initiative.
So quick joke, someone. So we're supposed to be giving you an award. The award isn't here, I'm not gonna say. And I was saying to myself, I'm gonna say supply chain issue. I'm gonna come up with some sort of lie. But it's not here. And then I'm like, how could I come up here and lie to give an award to a man who lives his truth, who spoke his truth, who wrote his truth? So, in my humble apologies, your award isn't here. And given the times in America where we have this relationship with the truth, we wanted to give you a citizenship award. Just because you continuously live in truth, as I said, you write the truth, you speak it. But in the English department, there's something that someone said, speak your truth, even if your voice trembles or something like that. And I was looking at you speaking up here when the questions were coming in, even though there some of them uncomfortable and you still stood in truth. And I think this award is, I don't have it. It's really deserving of you. And Rob is my son's godfather. So I definitely, appreciate the opportunity to give this award that we don't have yet. But, in front of everybody, Rob, you've been an outstanding citizen. You've been representative of Brooklyn College. You've been representative of Black men. You've been representative of Black queer men. You've just been a representative of what a true citizen should be. So, on behalf of Black faculty and staff and everyone else, we wanted to offer you that. All right. Take a picture.
You will formally get the award that comes with the plaque. This is the first inaugural Black Faculty Staff Citizenship Award. So, we're going to recognize a faculty or staff member or alumni that gives back to Brooklyn College, and you've definitely been generous with giving back. All right. Next up, we're going to proceed to the panel portion of the evening, and for that, I will bring back up Samantha St. Jury.
Thank you, President. Congratulations again on your award. You get it soon. Thank you for setting such an amazing example for not only Brooklyn College students, but Black voices across the nation. So you truly deserve this award. And Lawrence, keep me in mind for next year since I graduate. So just saying, but we will now get into our panel. I will introduce our panelists. Sitting on our panel, we have Robert Jones Jr., of course. He needs no further introduction. We have Samantha Bernadine, a principal activist with the Flatbush African Borough Coalition, an educator at Erasmus High School, adjacent to the burial ground, covering the intersection of Bedford and Church. We also have Allison Martinez, another principal activist with the Flatbush African Borough Coalition, a lawyer, and a co-founder of the nonprofit Brooklyn Level Up. We have Crystal Slauson Allen, a higher education officer at Brooklyn College, associate to the dean in the School of Behavior and Natural Sciences, and the past chair of Black faculty and staff. We also have Lawrence Johnson, a faculty member in the Department of Sociology and the current member chair of Black faculty and staff. Carla Bernard, the treasurer of Black City Union, will be asking the first few questions and will moderate any questions the audience may have. I will invite all of our panelists and Carla to the front. Yes. Oh, my fault. Stand up. Yeah. I'll bring the chair. She'll be all right. But before we do get into the questions, can we have Samantha or Allison tell us who the Foundation Coalition is, the current state of the show, and how White College can involve?
First, good evening. Thank you for this amazing opportunity to speak on behalf of our ancestors. The Black African Burial Ground Project or Coalition started out really with individuals coming together.
Good evening. It's better. Yeah, I'm actually a teacher, so I know how to use my teacher voice.
Yeah.
Me and Mike really, but we'll use it for this opportunity. The coalition started amongst individuals in the community of Flatbush when we were informed that the past mayor and past city councilman, so this was de Blasio and Matthew Eugene, who represented the area where the burial ground was. They had announced in October of 2020 during the pandemic that they were planning to put affordable housing on this particular property. And if you have been on the corner of Bedford and Church Avenue, you know that that is Erasmus, and next to Erasmus is an elementary school. But it was for me, for speaking on behalf of myself, I got involved because my principal, Miss Marie Pendergrass, was the principal for the High School for Youth and Community Development. Just for a tidbit, Erasmus no longer exists. It's Erasmus campus, but it's actually 5 schools on campus. So I teach in one of them. She had asked me and my parent coordinator to be part of the mayor's task force in regards to what should be placed on this property. And we were like, oh, it should be a community center, all these ideas was coming to our heads. And when we sat on the task force and we heard that this was actually a African burial ground, all that disappeared. It was about our ancestors. It was about the respect to have the city think that putting supportive housing is going to change the dynamics of homelessness and affordable housing in New York in this section of Brooklyn. It was a total slap in the face. So in a way, as you were describing that dream you had of digging and an older man probably saying to you, no, you don't know us, then Matthew, Gene, and de Blasio didn't know us. They definitely didn't know what the coalition was going to do. And we are happy to say that we were able to stop the plan of having housing built on top of our ancestors. And I tell my students this, that it is, you don't need to have a whole crew to stop something that is wrong. It just takes one person saying no. And by putting artwork, because I'm a very visual person, to inform the community to say, stop, did you know? And taking Saturdays during the pandemic now to educate the community. And then other people coming in and saying, I want to be part of this, and also doing their own thing. We got together because there's always power in numbers. And we were able to say, you know, we did this. You know, it takes organizations a long time to stop city officials from doing things. But we were able to stop it and stop then in less than a year. So we're very excited that we are able to come together to make that happen. And we have other goals as to what we plan to do with the community support, with the community voice. And we look forward to being part of this. So I'm gonna pass it to my
Thanks, Samantha. I guess what I would add to this is there's so much that we can do as a community with that space. I think the reality is from just my experiences having worked as a co-chair for land use with CD 17, having been an attorney and seeing what it is like to work for to the benefit of large corporations, often not to the benefit of your own people, but to be able to take those skills that you bring on the papers and apply them where you live and where you invest your time and your family's invested their time is important. So it's a sacrifice, but at the same time, it's so it should be gained in terms of not just representing our ancestors and this what they survived, and really not trying to make it a story about loss, but more about their resilience and what they have instilled in us and what they're capable of doing. And then thinking sort of what seeds are we going to plant for the future who's here. To use that space to celebrate survival, resilience, and a plan for the future. And that could be through art, it could be through digital technology. There's so much that we can use, research, all of that to avoid some of the real cultural erasure that we see. We're part of that burial ground, which people walk by and have no idea. It's actually under the gas station. So thinking, or the parking lot. So those are spaces, the post office. So what story are electeds telling us? Those are the things that we have to really think about as a community, what stories will be, or what commitments or requirements do we have? What does it mean when the mayor at the time was saying, let's tear down the statue of Thomas Jefferson at City Hall, but at the same time, we're going to put building on top of the remains of our ancestors in Brooklyn. Like that doesn't make sense. So that's what we can do together now, is figuring out what is the vision that we have collectively, what makes sense for us going forward, and just being open to working together for all the possibilities that are there.
I don't need this. Can you hear me? Okay, good. The profits in the Blackbush African Burial Ground Coalition. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm gonna get over it. Both work to tell stories surrounding slavery that usually we do not hear about. In fact, a lot of what we do hear about African descent people comes from another perspective. How can we continue to reclaim our history and push forward Black stories and voices? And then the second question, and what is the potential impact that can have?
The first part was how
can we continue to reclaim our history and push forward Black stories and voices? Don't hold your breath.
From a writing perspective, you ever hear the expression "when you must pass it on"? That's kind of how I think about it. So Wallace Irving walks, so James Baldwin could walk, so that Marlon James could fly, so that I could find us some place to be in the actual future. So my job is to open the door for someone else to have their authentic voice realized, recognized, celebrated, uplifted. So in my case, specifically, I mentor a young writer by the name of Dante Stewart, and Dante recently put out a book called Shaman Fire, American Epistle. And he had all sorts of difficulties with his publisher. They didn't push the book. They didn't really believe in his vision. And he found himself despondent. So my job as the elder artist is to use my resources to provide a path for him, because he's a phenomenal writer. And he could have easily allowed that difficulty to stop in his tracks. So we, myself, other writers, Kiese Lane, Disha Filiar, rallied around him, got him new representation. He's about to sign a new contract for his next book. So those are the ways that I see it as tangible in terms of ensuring that these voices that you're talking about continually get spotlighted, access, and are promoted such that they reach other people and inspire other people so that we can keep these ideas and these things going.
I would say in our work, part of it is centering and defining, maybe for the first time in this context of city agency work, the descendant community. What does that mean? Who is part of it? It's an opportunity for a council dance with people, Black people, to no matter where we happen to have been drawn off, to find that this spot connects us all. But it's also to recognize that, just like you with the challenge of centering that voice and recognizing, okay, we have to make relationships with other people to push things, agendas forward, to be able to appeal to that grandfather to support the stewardship, to appeal to that agency. We have to like balance a lot of competing interests, which is, I think, a lot of just work in general. It's just finding ways to center people's voices who have never been heard, or in this case, requiring that the city do serious community engagement work, which it doesn't do in an effective way. It doesn't hire locally to do that. Doesn't help to train the people who already do the work every day on the ground, to know the people who live here, to talk to them, to know the right language to use, to really elicit real data that's useful. They hire the same people all the time and they get the same results all the time. The same contracts go to the same people. So how, especially in light of the COVID recovery, where we're all supposed to be doing this differently, being equitable in our work, really like putting that to the test. So that I will give you an example of what we experienced with HPP and their task force. They were supposed to do deep, engagement with the community. And what happened was, partly because of COVID, it was all basically virtual for the most part. There, as you know, a large part of our community is not able to access the Zooms. And so therefore, you're not speaking to them. A lot of seniors you would never speak to if you're not engaging with the stakeholders in the community. And the reality is, even to the point where they had to do a report back, the report back was on 9/11, and that was their lead person thing, and they never did any real engagement. And then they wrote a report that said that everyone was really on board with affordable housing as an outcome, even though you had people. Those workshops have grown. So man was actually on the actual task force, said we didn't want affordable housing there at all. And that was ignored. So it's just, how do we continually engage? How do we make sure that we're broadening our coalition of people who are participating and making sure that we are doing deep visioning work, developing those skills, because then that's also jobs, that's training that people on this campus and others can make real use for as a basically as a career. Because imagine if you're now someone who knows how to elicit that real true data that is respectful of community when it comes to urban design or policy making or advising anyone who wants to do consulting or any type of work in this community. That is another stream of income that you can have that is honestly true and able to actually move the community forward in ways where it's community-based and respected. So there's a lot of opportunities that we hope that students in this campus and others in here will take advantage of.
I'm going to take a different approach. Be curious. Be okay being the only one. Be okay with all the no's. and be okay because haters will come for you. You had mentioned that you didn't want to have a white savior. And I'm going to throw this term. Tell me if you know it. If you know it, put your hands up. Switch code.
Yeah.
Now, if you are an immigrant, if you've ever been a minority, you have learned that you have to switch code. And for those who don't know, that's when you have to blend in so that you're not highlighted. And African Americans, Blacks, Caribbean Americans have basically switched codes since you were chained and brought here. It is time for us to let go of that and be okay being the only ones. We should be okay making people feel uncomfortable. I always tell my students that you are a raw diamond, and it is my job to push you and apply pressure. Because when you have finished with me, you will be shining as the gem that you are. We have to do that with America. We have to push and apply pressure and make those feel uncomfortable. That is the only way that we'll be able to have the conversation and to have healing happen. When we just say, well, we just have to know, healing can never happen when we are just making excuses or trying to avoid so that we can fit in, so we can at least get to where we need to get to, because nothing is promised to us. The ironic thing about being involved in this work, and I think of it as a blessing during a pandemic, is that it had to force us to stop and then to see that things that was happening before the pandemic. And when you didn't believe when we said it was happening, now you're forced to see it. And I'm like, yeah, welcome to our world. And that world is not, it's not pretty, but it's amazing. And it goes to our resilience that even through uncomfortable, terrible, inhumane things that has happened to us, we have continuously prospered. And if you see our culture, it's amazing. The other thing I will mention is that, and this is to my people, we have to stop fighting each other. And I say that to say that I consider myself a Caribbean American. I'm first generation born in Brooklyn. So PK all day. But my parents are from Grenada, the island of spice. So I acknowledge the fact that I have family members from the other islands of the Caribbean. So I say I'm Caribbean American. And when my parents came here, they were told what Black America was. So there was this fight between Caribbean Americans and Black Americans. Mm-hmm. But who are the puppet masters putting those strings involved? Mm-hmm. So sometimes we have to stop and say, why are we fighting each other? Because there's someone who don't want us to unite. There's someone who don't want us to uprise, which is why they were feeling away about your ending. Uprising doesn't have to be violent. Uprising has to have the energy to make change happen. It goes to applying that pressure. So for those who are not part of the descending community, it is okay to be uncomfortable, because that's the only way for us to sit down and have an honest conversation. So if you're the only one that will say, look, I know that I didn't enslave anybody, no one in my family did that I know of, because you don't know, but I can understand. Because if we have true white allies to help us in this fight, amazing things can happen. Because in the end of the day, we all believe and we all are human. We were born and then we die. It's that dash in between that really determines our legacy and who we are as a people.
Second question. Sorry. Activism comes in many different forms. For Robert, it was writing. For FAB,
FABGC, I want to say FABGC.
FABGC, okay,
Fabulously fabulous.
FABGC, okay. And Black faculty and staff, it was organizing people within their community. What inspired each of you and why is slavery and its legacy central to your work?
Well, it was one of the people that organized a lot of trouble on this campus. He was chief troublemaker. I guess what inspired me is the students here. So Brooklyn College, I think, is probably one of the most special colleges in CUNY. And I think of it as the premier college of Brooklyn. Because it is. There's like, and we brought forth people like Bernie Sanders, Robert Jones, Jelani Williams. Like those are so and you know, when you think about where we are located, what's happening, we, a lot of the activism on campus has impact. Many people don't know this, but like by collecting stories, or the politics, nosy, and there was a riot in the cafeteria years ago, and that brought forth the Puerto Rican Alliance, as well as the African Studies Department, as well as the Puerto Rican Latino Studies Department. So an uprising on our campus for two departments, and that's not a story that we want to tell to the students. Like a lot of great changes happen with uprisings, and sometimes it's important to organize an uprising. So I think of it as activism. You can't, you have to inspire people to not be afraid to get in trouble. You have to inspire people to not be afraid to make trouble. And, I think it's really, really important to do that here and to like let the students at least see the staff and the faculty making trouble as well. And saying that, hey, we heard you and we listen and we are here with you and we hope that you're here with us. So I think of it that way. That's something that is Brooklyn College. And I think it's important that we continue to do that and continue to hold on to that legacy of making good trouble and being a troublemaker. And continuing to do that.
When I think of what inspires me, I probably have to say my grandmother who came from Guyana here on her own. She actually graduated from so I think of my mother who had me as a kid at every rally in the city over Central Park 5 or anything was I grew up going to rallies. I think of my godmother, who her parents were instrumental in integration of the education system in Maryland growing up. So I think of just the power of ordinary women doing extraordinary things. And that's in addition to raising families, putting up with things or trying things for the first time, not being afraid, even if they were, to be the first to try something new. I think of in my own story at this point, it's taking a chance on myself to be like an entrepreneur, to do the things that matter to me. I never would have called myself an activist before, but when I think about how I can fuse my skill set that I've developed through my education and my work experience with my desire for creativity, technology to move things forward for people in our community. I think those are the tools that I want to develop and that I want to impart to other people so they can inspire other people to find those gifts within themselves, which we all have to pull together to use to really make the world that we really want to see.
Inspiration comes in many forms. The first will be my parents. My father, his parents, my grandmother is Caribbean, my grandfather is Portuguese white. And his family, who migrated into Grenada, immigrated into Grenada, they married each other because it was against the law to marry a Black in Grenada. And he made the decision to fall in love and marry Brown and had 6 kids. So my father like travels from the Daily, not the Daily Show, one of the shows he had a book that says I am a criminal. Basically, I'm against the law, I'm a crime. My father was that. But didn't really know. Because again, the system in the Caribbean in regards to slavery was different as in America. And to see this man come up to this country in the mid-60s, not really knowing what was going on, and to be put in a position of explaining his skin color. He's as pale as you now in wintertime, and he looks like he's Cuban in the summertime. And being in construction, he was a bricklayer. Being in construction, Blacks were not really in that field, dominated by Italians and Irish. So they didn't know where to put him. So he had to find his place. And being a sharp dresser as he is, he never let people know he was in construction. So he would dress a certain way and then do his work and then dress another way. But I remember him coming home one day really stressed out and didn't understand why he had to have a shot of rum to kind of soothe him. Was because one day the workers defecated on his tools. They wouldn't allow him to change his clothes amongst them. So he had to change his clothes at a local bar that allowed him to change his clothes so he doesn't come home dirty. And there's an old Jamaican song that says, I didn't leave my island to go to Rikers Island, right? And he kept that in his head, that I can punch this dude dead in his mouth. But I didn't come from my country to go live on some island. So again, switch code. But it tore a part of him. My mother, being the amazing, soft-spoken when need be, but being in your face when she needs to be, took me to all those communities, showed me what it meant to be civically engaged. And that was by accident. That was, my parents believe in education is everything. And as a student, I was passing everything really great until 4th grade. And 4th grade, I didn't have a teacher that should have had a license. But I wound up failing. And the assistant principal came to my mom saying, you need to put her in special education. And my mom didn't understand what that meant. But because she was so great, she spoke to my older teachers and they was like, if you do that, you will ruin her life. And special education is not special education now. It's like a special ed teacher. But that was the spark of her saying that I need to know more about this country's educational system. I need to know more about the system that we're living in. And I need to make change happen. So to this day, my parents continuously inspire me to not accept the status quo. And if something don't sound right, smell right, or look right, question it and hold people accountable. So I'm inspired by them. And I'm also inspired every day when I drive to work and I see the ribbons that we've put up and the flags that we acknowledge of the Caribbean and diaspora and the artwork that my students do. That inspires me that I don't get mad anymore passing by. When those ribbons wave in the wind, those are the ancestors saying, good job, dear soldier. Keep on the good fight. So that inspires me. And hopefully it inspires others. And the only way for us to continue on making an impact is that us as adults, we have to take a child and bring them, whether they like it or not, sit them in the back and be like, that's how change happened. And to go to Shirley Chisholm's point, they don't offer you a chair at the table, bring your folding chair and you make your space.
I would say, what inspires me is there's always something to learn. Right? And I think about, you know, I got a whole PhD, right? And I've been a whole lot more about slavery than before. And that has really challenged me to, you know, not decenter, you know, slavery in my work as sociologist. Right? So I think in almost everything I do, I think there's not one person breathing who cannot trace their personal history, the way the world has been shaped to slavery, right? I have become way more, you know, creative and imaginative in my work because that's what it takes for you to teach students. You know, they don't want to read text that does not connect to their life, right? So my question I always wonder which they have to look within, search within yourself, then begin to understand the world in a way that you didn't understand before. The reading group that we had a year ago, it was all about conversations between, you know, Africana studies or Black studies and indigenous studies. We're talking about legacies of slavery and genocide. Those are conversations, those are legacies that impact all of our lives. But yet, we have a student population that that's getting educated in their chief concern is what type of job can I get with my degree? By the way, what inspires me is to take those very real pressing concerns about getting a job and making money and actually say, well, what do people die for? Not to get a job and make money, but to imagine a whole different type of work. And it's those conversations between enslaved Africans and anomaly people, or whether people searching for freedom, that actually gives the bedrock foundation of what the world can be, because what we have is not it. Right? I think that's what inspires me. You don't hear around creating a new world out of dress slavery. Right? Slavery is related to every single problem that we have. Right? We have students who simply want to get a job. I think a lot of us faculty and staff, we simply want to keep our job. And we've inherited this situation because human beings through slavery, through genocide, was made disposable. And with slavery, we really think about what it is, and not just the spectacles of slavery, but the creation of a certain type of human life that we all become susceptible to. Then we start asking questions, put this concern for a job on hold, and say, who am I as a person? And what type of demands for life must I make as a person? Right? What about the people? Right? So I think I'm inspired because there's never a semester where I teach the same syllabus, I teach the same books, I ask the same questions. I'm always asking questions that only inspires me, but inspires others. And hopefully I'm always becoming a better teacher. And I think there's no way around that unless you address slavery.
In the interest of time and to respect everybody else's time, I'm opening up the question, opening up questions to you guys. So.
Hi, my name is Tamara, and my question is, how can we inspire students, or they youth to become more active and engaged, or do you have any advice for budding activists?
That's a great question.
Well, I'll say. I think it starts with just conversations. It's talking to people and really caring enough to know what interests them. And then when you're devising programming services or events or actions, that you make sure that you still keep engaging with people, respect them enough to listen, respect them enough to allow them to contribute what they will, and create spaces where people can, it's okay for them to express whatever it is they're feeling, and then we're still going to work it out, whatever it is. And I think when it comes to the way that we design workspaces or all of that has to really evolve so that people are getting as much out of those experiences as we're extracting from them in their time. So I know that from the work for the organization I'm building on my own, that's really important, an important part of the culture is that I'm trying to build, is that I'm investing in you. If there's something you want to learn, that even if it's just for a fleeting second, it's valuable. If I can find that course for you, I want you to take it, because you never know what that one experience will lead to, and you have to keep being open to that possibility. So those are the ways that I think of in terms of engagement. It's just gotta be open, and I think sometimes some of the easiest ways are using arts or tech to be able to break down barriers and be able to keep people engaged. I was right. Okay. What do you want to know? What bothers you? Those are the two questions that my students. I teach a social justice class, and I give the assignments in different levels. Choose something that is of interest to you. Choose something that speaks to your heart. Choose something that you want to see change. The beauty of teaching, especially electives, is that it can be very creative, like that sound, and I think sometimes we forget that young people, once young, and young people have great power if you allow them to just be free and not have certain restrictions on them. And our young people today, they instant gratification. If I want something, I could just Google it, it pops up, and oh, there it is. But the reality is you have to have patience. It's going to take time. And to Allison's point, understanding those systems and finding ways, making those goals small, because again, it's a marathon, it's not a race. So if you want to change gun violence, okay, what does that mean? If you want to change homelessness, what does that mean? Giving someone a sandwich is one thing. Having a conversation with someone who doesn't smell that great is a whole nother thing. Because now you have made that person not a creature, but a human being. And that takes a lot of time. But if you give young people an opportunity to think outside the box, say, I don't care what your idea is, let's throw it out on the table and let's see what sticks. And not have limitations, it's a beautiful thing.
think my answer would be, all education is good. I think the best start is what are you getting in your classroom? If they bring it into the classroom. I think when you leave that example, you'll find out who your comments are. Ultimately, it makes Brooklyn College a different place because there's no major, there's no discipline where every personal experience does not come into play. Because the disciplines were created by people form consensus ideas about what you should be taught. And I got to all types of trouble in undergrad because I've always had different ideas of what psychology was supposed to be. Right? How come my mother wasn't a psychologist? Because she told me how to think about the world and how to anticipate what other people think about you and do it anyway. Right? So I think that's the type of stuff. Just given our position in society wanting to make change, you just have to look for people who are going to be that class who will support you. And you find them back doing it. And that's where, that Crystal, right? We cause trouble on campus, right? We look for other people to cause trouble. And, we started the anti-racist coalition. We were looking for students, right? Because students, inspire us, right? Daniel Vasquez was braver than all of us, right? So I think that's how I think about it. Nobody's brave by themselves, at least not consistently, but when you have people who support you, then it's easier to be brave, then you get more done.
Activism is something, I see activism as many pronged thing. There are different ways to be active or to activate. The people I most admire are the ones that their own selves, their physical bodies on the line. The people we see in the streets of Missouri after Mike Brown. Those people who are like, I remember this picture of this young Black woman standing against an army of police officers in sundress, and thought, what resolve that takes. But then you also need the person who strategizes, so that it's not just formative. Like you did this thing, but now what? How does this thing alter or disrupt? When you think of, like, for example, the Montgomery bus boycott, when several of our ancestor activists organized that, it seemed like such a thing. Like, okay, we're not going to ride the bus anymore. But what does that mean now for the elderly? What does it mean for people with disabilities? What are we putting in place to what structures are we putting in place to ensure that the sacrifices are not too difficult for everybody to get on board and unite behind this idea? So they got action because Black people in Montgomery said, you're not getting any more of our money. And we will keep doing this until you change. Some of the problems that I see now, and this is what's so pernicious about capitalism, is that we don't want to give up any comfort at all. Our ancestors were willing to give up comfort to get to achieve a goal. We are not so much. We like our iPhones and all of these things because they're seductive. I don't want to say all of us, but many of us don't wish that we want change without any sacrifice. And I don't know if that's possible. We have to sacrifice something, even if it's something as large or small as comfort. But in terms of my own activism, what got me interested was when I started to recognize that me as a Black queer, male. Just my existence alone bothered the society that we lived in. And I couldn't understand why. I was like, why? Like, I'm just breathing. Like, that's literally all I'm doing is breathing. How do I make a world in which my breathing is okay? That it just started as simple as that. And I guess that's kind of selfish, but then it extends out. How do I make it a better place for others to also breathe who are being told that their breathing is a problem? You know, how do we then jump over that hurdle that you talked about when we get hit against one another, so that that collective liberation is impossible because I'm from New York and you're from Jamaica and they're from Brazil and that was from Haiti, and we're all we somehow don't like one another. Like we are living the same existence. I think you said earlier, dropped off in different places. And yet we have a problem with each other and not the goodness. And we can't see that. That's a problem. And so it goes back to what you were saying about it begins with a conversation. When you tell your little brother, your little sister, your little sibling, it's not right to think that way of that person because of that. We're asking allies to be uncomfortable. We have to also ask ourselves to be uncomfortable because it was hard for me to sit at a table with my grandfather who's in the Nation of Islam, was in the Nation of Islam, and say, "Grandpa, gay." That was the hardest thing for me to do, and to also tell him, "I don't like the things you say about homosexuality. I don't care what Barry told you." That was a difficult conversation to have. But you know what? At the age of 92, my grandfather said, "I don't completely understand, but you're my grandson and I love you." This is a man born in 1970, seen all the wars of this country, lived through the Depression, tapped into the pennies. Couldn't imagine a gay family member, much less a gay grandson, came to a place where he accepted me and told me, "Yo, your husband is very good." You know, like you say that. But it begins right there with you trembling, telling this man who you respect and who's been the patriarch of your family for as long as you've been alive. And son, good. You're dehumanizing me. Could you be better?
You can ask the final question and then Roslyn King will give a closing remarks.
Okay,
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you. So many of you spoke about being the first, whether an author, an activist, a chair, and the importance of speaking your truth, finding your voice. So with that, I want to say, like, how do you recharge yourself? What is and how about the importance of self-care and being able to continue to stay in the fight?
I would be problem with self-care. I will lay in bed and watch Craig of the Creek and FaceTime with my nieces, nephews, and nibblings. I will eat my favorite foods. I will put on some cocoa butter. And you know, I had to come to that because so many Black people in the diaspora understand this, that self-care feels like an indulgence. It feels like you're being lazy. You're supposed to be productive all the time. And that's part of the legacy of antebellum slavery, is that we're machines, not people. So it took me a while to get out of the mindset that my being lazy or being comfort or taking a nap. Y'all ever hear of the nap ministry? It's this movement on social media that encourages Black people to nap because it is, you know, we don't think of ourselves as entitled to be sleepy. So it's very important. I look at these statistics about the lifespans of Black people, how we're running ourselves so ragged, dropping dead in the middle of work because we only think about, and this is a function of patriarchy too, particularly for Black men, but also for Black women. You're a protector, you're a provider, you're a laborer, you're a soldier, you're a sex toy. But in any of those things, you're never a person. And so white supremacist capitalist patriarchy endeavors to take away your personhood. And the biggest act of resistance, I think, for any Black person is to take it back. And part of that is rest. It is going to watching your favorite movie or television show. It is going on a date with your loved one. It's large and small ways for you to take care of yourself and be okay with feeling joy. I'm one of those people that for a very long time didn't think I was entitled to joy. Whenever something bad happens, that felt comfortable. When something good happens, I was suspicious. Another function of being a Black person in this society, because you're almost programmed and conditioned to accept those sorts of things, suffering and such. So again, the greatest act of resistance, I think, is finding that joy and hope.
Well, returning for me is pretty tough. I have two small kids, a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old. Now he knows how to take off his own clothes. I don't know, but like for me, recharging is just like I'm a big sci-fi. That's my ministry. I love sci-fi. I started now we have a lot more Afrofuturism, and it's just so fascinating. It's just like Lovecraft Country was just amazing. And like Watchmen, like the ending of Watchmen is just like sometimes I just watch the end over and over again because it's like imagine this in a world where white supremacy is the villain and a Black woman becomes a god. Like I just need to watch that episode. Spoiler. Oh, sorry. So like I love sci-fi. I would like to thank the reading book because you guys introduced me to Octavia Butler. And I swear to God, I've read like since we ended Parable Bookstore, I've read like 6 books. I've read all of them. I'm starting to read the short stories. It's just like that's just me. And I'm so mad at myself for like never knowing about her. Like, I was an English major, I focused in linguistics, and I had to take all these like multicultural courses and stuff like that. It was just like I even took a science fiction course. And it was just so weird. It's almost like I've never read this before. Like I powered through the book. And I was like, we're just like read this chapter. I was just like, shit, I'm so sorry. Like I couldn't stop. And it just like so sci-fi, that's how I recharge. It's just like looking at the future because I'm like, why would I tell challenge?
Exactly. I'm Black. I don't do the past. So like, for me, I think if I'm honest with myself, I need to learn how to do self-care. I think part of what drives me and I think about because I have multiple ventures that I'm working on and building is I'm really like clear on it is important for me to figure out what my legacy is going to be. Even if I don't personally have children, but what legacy am I leaving for my community? If I adopt children, what is my path going to be? I don't want to, I don't want my life to have gone away and me not doing something that made a difference. So that means that sometimes I'm up 3 o'clock at night because I fashion myself as like a creative and a visionary. I straddle between the logical side of me that's into law and all that stuff, and the part of me that values what creativity brings me. So I've started to watch a lot of like Korean romantic films, and I'm kind of learning Korean a little bit. Like that's my thing. But my problem now is I have to watch the screen in order to work and do that at the same time. But I'm managing. But I think part before the pandemic, it used to be travel. I love international travel. But now it's reading more. I've always worked reading, but now it's like scheduling time to make that a habit again. As important as it was for me to be able to, you know, as a kid to read constantly because that was my love, it's reconnecting with that now as my way to escape and take time for myself. I don't know how to. And I don't. Putting on makeup is like self-care, I guess. I don't do it. But on a serious note, I don't know what self-care is. I'm learning that. My parents worked, they own property, all I knew was work. We didn't take family vacations. Family vacations was going to grandma. My sister, being the youngest, she knows how to self-care, so I look at her. And being the oldest, you feel the need to be responsible for everyone. And at this stage in my life where I'm older in age and raising a 15-year-old who thinks he's 25, it's, and then also going and then having a job where you have a bunch of other 15, 16-year-olds who think they're 25. And then looking at what is happening all around you, my brain doesn't know how to stop. I've been constantly thinking about, okay, we need to change this, we need to change that, how do I do this? I don't sleep well. 4 hours of sleep, and that's it. Anything over my body hurts. Before the pandemic, the gym used to be my therapy. I'm slowly getting back into that. But I don't know what self-care is. And the older I get, the more my body is saying that you have to do it. You have to sleep. You have to eat. But you cannot skip eating. Thinking right now, did I eat today? You know, because the minute I walk onto my campus, I'm hit with Miss Brandy, we need this, we need that, we need that. And I feel that everything is urgent. Because in many ways, it is urgent. Really having young people who are facing all kinds of things, it's urgent. So what I find that is visual is that chef. You know, Thursday is Top Chef. So we go to Whole Foods and be like, all right, what are we gonna make? Or it's chop. We're gonna open up the cabinet, see what we have, and make something and see what it is. Don't tell nobody what's really in it. I was able to partner with one of our organizations that's partnered with us, Flatbush Mixtape. They partner with another organization that gives out food. So I was able to start a pantry in my school. So before food goes to waste, I take it home and make a meal and I feed my students. So they're now accustomed to, all right, what we have for lunch, you know, what you making? So it's kind of like my classroom becomes the cafeteria. And they never had soup before, like soup. So now I got to cook, you know, like corn soup and things like that. And I'm like, what does the young here? You know, so it's that is what deposits into my bank as I'm constantly withdrawing. So even though giving is draining me,
it's another form of giving when I see a smile. That deposit into me. But definitely I have to how to take myself out on a date. You know, I don't need no one to take me out on a date. I can take myself out, like, "Girl, get a steak." You know, like dress up for me, like, okay. I need to do that more, so that I don't lose myself, but also I don't pass what my parents passed on to me, which I adore and admire. But all they taught me is that you have to work. Things have to get it done. And my son is teaching me by not doing what I taught him to do, that you know, you just need to breathe on, like relax. So I don't want to pass those things on, but she could do more. But yeah, I'm learning.
I would say, music around self-care, but I don't think it's a whole practice. Without it, you would back a long time ago. And for me, it's as simple as laughing and dancing. I think about the scene in Toni Morrison's Beloved, where she describes the laughing and saying old children, the women. It was necessary because they were carrying it so much, right? And when I think about self-care, I'm thinking about the type of laughing that you have to catch your breath and you get a headache. And you feel like laughter is bothering your work, you forget about at least for that second. Passed away right before COVID started. She's like my grandmother. But she used to always connect because I kept bringing up this whole of her from like the 60s or 70s. And she had like the silver wig, sequins, and platforms. And she was literally, and this art is like my grandmother because she was 25 years older than my mother, right? So she was my grandmother figure. So from the point in which I became, you know, at least a teenager, she was already very old. But to see this picture of her in the 60s, where she dressed like something you would see on Soul Train, and she was in a picture with somebody else in the neighborhood who I didn't know she knew. But they were literally in the club, dressed, you know, like I wouldn't imagine. And she was so low to the floor, her ass was scraping. And she was like, yeah, it brought a smile to her face, even at 80 plus years old. But it's those things that make me say, the world is a miserable, absurd place. What can you capture in that? So when I'm able to laugh, people who know me best know that there are certain things that always make me laugh. Even if those are things that made me cry in the past. The ability to laugh at some point is essential to our survival. The ability to dance, you know, dance is one of those things where, you know, I grew up and I was too tough to dance. You know, I learned to dance as I got older, but I cared about certain things because I was being watched, right? But all, you know, we call old heads in Chicago, it's like you could be a gangster and still dance to house music. Become too tough to dance. And I was like, it's an observation that I was like, wow. And then I realized that, you know, dancing, when you really are dancing, you're fun, you're laughing and joking, you're not thinking about the world. And I think that's the form of self-care because it's hard. So what do you do on a Friday night, Saturday night? And if you just by yourself watching Netflix and eating, I don't think that's self-care, but I think it's the things that we've done to our yes. Yes.
Lawrence, you went nodding and.
Up next to Mike, is Dr. Rosamond King, who will give us our final area.
A blast to the mic. So thank you all, both the people who are online as well as the people who are here for being here and being part of this wonderful conversation. We are in the presence of visionaries. Right? We are in the presence of visionaries. And I want to thank our neighbors from HBC for the partnership. And we're really glad that different people at Brooklyn College have been engaging with you and helping support the work, and we really hope that that continues. And I want to thank our colleagues from the Black Action Sound Organization and the student organization. Let me say a special word about Professor Lawrence Johnson. What you're seeing here, an event that was emceed by a student that featured community organizers next to staff, next to a creative writer, that is the vision of Lawrence Johnson. The reading group, the campus-wide reading group is under the aegis of the Wolf Institute, but it is Lawrence Johnson's vision. Because for many years, the Wolf Institute has sponsored a faculty reading group. And that is really important, and staff have also been coming in and welcome, and it's an important space for faculty to hold and have intellectual conversations with each other. But Lawrence came to me and said, well, why can't we have a reading group for everybody? And I said, well, we can. And he said, all right. And it has been his vision the entire time. All I have done is write the check. And I'm very happy, you know, it won't do write a check. And so thank you for your vision, Lauren. And along with that, hopefully, I'm not going to be too outre, but you know, David talked about telling the truth. And as we thank our alumni, our former colleagues, our visionary artist, Robert Jones, I want to say that the award that you are getting comes with it. Ooh. And he didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
It's not $1 million, nowhere near that. It's a modest check, but it's an important check because Robert Jones, this is maybe the 5th time he at Brooklyn College since the book came out, or every single time he's come for free. Every single time he has enthusiastically showed up while in between he's doing the New York Times and NPR and all these other places. He has been happy to come here for free. And Lawrence and I said, we are going to honor you with a check. And that check has a little bit of money from the Wolf Institute, but the majority of that money is from the Black Faculty and Staff Organization. And what that means is that it's from dues. What that means is that it's from the pockets of Black people who work at period. So it's not a huge but it is meaningful time. So I want to publicly say that we are honoring you with an object that you'll get to keep for a long time. And we are honoring you with a little cash that, you know, maybe you will do a little something fun with to self-care. And I just want to again thank everyone for coming. And I want to hope that what you have seen and heard and participated in here today is going to continue to burn the fire of vision within you. Because I know personally, many of you in this room, I know that you are also visionaries, and Brooklyn College is the crucible for all of us. So I'm looking forward to all of the partners that we're going to continue to light and the trouble that we're going to continue to make. So thank you.
If anyone has a copy of the process that they want me to sign, I am willing to do so.
I'm like,